I'm Mark Boris and this is Straight Talk.
But as soon as game day came, I was just like, fucking hell, like, I don't want to do this. Like, how can I get out of it? This is like, driving to the MCG when you're like, should be absolutely wrapped that you've got a game and you're playing. And I'm like thinking, fuck, maybe if I break my leg in the first quarter, then I'll be done. So just go out there and go as hard as you can and just see what happens.
Dyl Buckley, welcome to Straight Talk, mate.
Thanks for having me, mate. It's a harsh reality, but it's like such good perspective. It's like no one actually sort of gives a fuck about you.
Yeah.
Like you're so
100%.
irrelevant, like of anything. And as soon as you somewhat come to terms with that and actually learn to love it, it does make your life a lot easier.
But let's just talk about the season for 2025.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is going to happen? Dyl Buckley, welcome to Straight Talk, mate.
Thanks for having me, mate.
So one podcaster to another.
Yeah, exactly.
How's it feel to be interviewed?
Oh, mate, it's a bit, it's interesting. I think it's actually a lot easier being where you are when you've got the control of the conversation. Yeah, you sort of forget what it's like.
Yeah, but when I'm interviewing a podcaster, I'm not sure if I have control of the conversation. So I had Mia Friedman on last week before.
I actually listened to that.
And Mia's like, great talent. And I found the conversation started to become more of a conversation. We carry on a little bit when we're podcasting. We just try to have a conversation. But you're right. You got the brief. I got the brief. The podcaster, the host, has got the brief and is sort of in control of it. And but when you talk to another podcaster, they start to make it more conversational. Like Mia started to sort of half by interview me. And it's interesting about the whole podcaster world. And it's interesting about this concept of conversation. What have you learned? I just quickly want to know this part, but what have you learned about the concept of conversation from being a podcaster host?
It's a great question. I've learned so much from it. It's honestly been for me, in a selfish way, it's been like a degree in life. Like I'm so lucky to sit down with people each week, a lot like yourself. And as you said before, like you're interviewing me, but I've got so many questions for you today, like about just how to do it. Because I've just always been a really curious guy. And sometimes I forget that we're recording the conversation, we're filming it. I'm just genuinely curious, like how this person has done this.
Still just start a curiosity.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, you probably know these people, I know these people want to go, I've got to get a podcast because they think it's sort of a necessary thing in terms of running a business, whatever the case may be, building your profile. Would you say curiosity, therefore, in the way you conduct the podcast is a really important piece, like a necessary piece to have in the podcast?
100%. Yeah. And that's where you get the best stuff from, right? Like, you got run sheets and obviously that's great to have if you fall back on it, but you want it to just flow and be curious and let the conversation go. Like I've always got in mind, I suppose, pre-show or pre-guest, I always think back to like when I was 16, 17 years old. I just had no idea how things worked. And even with, mum's friends or dad's friends, they'd come around, they'd be like, I'm an accountant. I go, oh, okay. So like, how does that work? Like, what do you do? It's like, so what time do you get to work? And then what? Do you just go sit at your desk? And then like, do you have a meeting? Like, who tells you what to do? How do you know how that happens? And they'd be like, mate, shut up. Like, how these get, but I'm like, I just didn't understand. And then I think I realized like when you get to, older and I suppose a little bit wiser now and you have a bit more life experience, like, no one knows what they're doing. Like no one has any idea. But the more that this beautiful space of podcasting, open conversation has worked it out, you have such more of an understanding now of how things can work and how there's just not one way to do things, which I think maybe an older generation had been trapped into, of just one way to go. You get the job, you buy the house, the picket fence, but there's so many other things you can do. There's so many other ways you do it. And probably the key metric of that as well along the way, which may not have ever got spoken about, is there's going to be some adversity, and it's sort of not what happens, it's how you react to it.
Is podcasting though, there's some wonderful interviewers in the world, like Michael Parkinson, we've seen lots of great interviewers in the world, like I have, at least, maybe not so much your generation, because my generation, you listen to radio or like long form interviews, or there used to be TV shows where dudes used to get up there and do the interview. There's women do it too as well, but I've only ever used to watch the dudes, and I'm going back a long way, like Michael Parkinson's Parker. But that sort of drifted out of TV a little bit because, it's probably commercial. You probably can't get enough advertisers around it. But podcasts have sort of taken its place. I don't know whether we film ours, you probably film yours too. What do you think though, that podcasting has done, I'm not talking about from an audience point of view, from the host point of view, your point of view, what do you think it's done for you in terms of building a skill around being able to converse with people? Because I find conversation, like if I'm out in the street and I'm having a conversation, I'm now starting to take my podcasting skills to be a better person on the street when I talk to someone. What has it done for you? What have you learned about yourself and your own skill base in terms of having done podcasts successfully? What's it done for you outside of podcasting, like as a person relative to conversations? Or you just say, I've done my conversation today, I've done a podcast, I'm not talking to any other bastard.
Yeah. I think for me, there's a few things that jump out when you said I've probably never really reflected on it too much, but it's a great point you make. I think for me, the one thing and the one advice I always give young podcasters, and this can be done in life, like even going on dates or anything like that, you often give that, silence is the enemy of awkwardness. Like it's like you don't want silence, so you keep talking. So one skill that I've picked up, and I think a lot of like podcasters and people make a mistake, is when they get the yeahs going. So, like when you interview and you go, yeah, and you'll be talking over the guests, and it just like the listener's like, fucking hell, mate, can you shut up? But you do it because you want to show that you're listening.
I'm engaged.
You want to show you're engaged. So one thing I learned really early was listen with your eyes, and more meaning to have eye contact and almost just like nod along to encourage that person to keep talking and not keep speaking, but you're just like listening with your eyes, showing you're engaged. And the more you hold, the more you just hold and don't actually speak, that silence, that person will just keep talking forever because you're just listening with your eyes, you're there, you're engaged, but you're not interrupting. So that's one. I think the curiosity part's there. If someone does have some social anxieties and struggles in conversation, don't think of the next question. Just literally listen to what that person is saying. And when it finishes, you will think of the next question to come to. So don't preempt anything. Just literally just listen. And if you don't know, I'd be like, oh, that's a great point. Yeah, you stumped me there. Fucking hell, I didn't know where that was going. That was good. Hey, moving on. What's the next thing? And then I suppose the one after it that I think's been really important for me actually, and something I'm really lucky to do in this role, is how important it actually is to connect with other humans without a phone or technology. So like for, probably 2 to 3 hours a week, I sit down and have like the old school D&M with someone that you're not engaged in any social media. We're literally just chatting. We're super focused. It's almost like a form of meditation that we are just like so engaged right now, having a chat. Like we can't go pick up our phones. We can't go scroll. We can't think about anything else. Like I'm locked in. So I think for me, like those 3 things are pretty cool. And, even if someone doesn't want to go publicly start a podcast, like go and practice that. Get coffees with people. Put your phones away and just literally have a chat for an hour and a half and see what happens.
Do you think as a result of doing podcasts, you are better at dealing with, say, any form of social anxiety? I mean, did you have social anxiety before this? Like, because me, I'm not necessarily a really social dude. And although everybody who listens to my show and watches my screen think they know me really well, which is sort of a consequence of, I guess, being successful in this space. No doubt you'll experience the same thing. But I wouldn't call myself socially anxious, but I would say that I can, prior to me doing podcasts, I've been doing it for 8 years now, 9 years. But prior to that, I was probably not that easily socially engaged. Maybe I was too focused on what I was doing and wasn't, therefore, by definition, have the energy to be interested in what someone else is doing. But this has forced me to become interested in what other people are doing. And I don't know. Sometimes I challenge myself, am I genuinely interested in what Dyl's telling me, or am I doing this because I'm performing? Because I know I've got the camera on me, I've got to perform. I don't know which one it is. It doesn't really matter. I'm just disclosing it to you. I don't want you to feel like Mark couldn't give a shit, because I do give a shit, but sometimes I ask myself the question, like, and conversation a lot of times is about performance, and it can be quite exhausting if you're not naturally really good at it. Like some people are so bloody good at this shit, like, and I'm not naturally very good at it. I've developed the skill, but I'm not naturally good at it. What do you think about that as a consequence and of being in the podcasting space, being successful at it, having spoken to many, many hundreds of people in this formal sort of environment? How do you feel about yourself? Am I naturally interested or am I performing?
I had a chat with Mark Howard, so Howie does Howard Games.
He's great.
A few years ago, great guy, and he's been a cool support for me through this period too. Been a ripper.
He's podcast on Listener, I think.
Yes, it is. Yeah. And they've been sort of OGs of the game. And I had him on my show one day, and he said the interviewee, like the guest, is never bad. It's always about me. It's like, what can I do if they haven't performed? It's something that I haven't done to get that out of them. So I took that feedback on board, and I think, like, if you look at that and you think, was that episode bad? And if it was, like, it's got to be to do with the host.
How do you work if the episode's better? How you felt about the episode?
Yeah, just how you felt about it.
Rated?
Yeah, if you're not, well, I think, like, if at the end of the day, it's how you felt about the episode. Like, if you didn't get out of it what you wanted to get out of it, it's got something to do with the person that is ultimately navigating the conversation.
The host.
So, yeah, the host. Like, you've got to get to those points where you know, if it is getting boring or there's nothing that you want to talk about, you go, fuck it, let's pivot. Like, and I think that's what people love about podcasting, you know, like if that was on live TV, you can't just go, hey, fuck, we're down some weird rabbit hole right now. Like, why don't we just piss off and go somewhere else? Like, you can do that.
Yeah. So, but do you actually ever give yourself an uppercut and say?
Definitely. Oh, mate, sometimes I go, hey, mate, I'm so sorry. I don't know where the fuck we are right now. Like, should we just like go back and talk about this? And people are like, yeah, fuck it. Like, that's what people love though.
Yeah.
I think, like, I'm someone who confesses to not know exactly what I'm doing. I think I have a fair idea, but I think when you pretend you know everything, that's when you get yourself into trouble. So, you know, part of my lightheartedness that I can get with people and get them to open up about themselves or share things they want to do is, like, I don't have all the answers, but I feel like I'm a pretty easy guy to be around. If you want to go and talk about things, let's do it. I'll go anywhere.
Is it so? Because, like, you know, at the end of the day, you and I now know, I never used to know this, but everybody's in this world is interested in telling their story.
Mm.
Everybody, all of us. Because, and I don't know whether we want really to tell the other person their story, but I think we like to relate the story to ourselves. And in that conversation, the other person gets to share in that. So let's say you're the podcaster, you're the host, and I'm being interviewed by you. You might say, well, Mark, you know, where'd you grow up, whatever, and I'm going to ask all these questions of you anyway. But and Mark likes to tell the story about himself out loud, and then and I'm sharing it with you, but really I'm sort of talking to myself about it.
Mm.
Because when I'm talking, I'm also listening. And, you know, most people, audiences don't realize that the podcast guest is also listening to himself or herself.
Mm.
And a lot of times we're affirming things we believe about ourselves. We're affirming our own story. Or sometimes we're actually even being asked a question like I tried to ask you right at the beginning. I did ask you at the very beginning about something we may never have thought about before. And it's actually interesting from my point of view to watch that person start to calculate the answer.
Mm.
Oh, that's interesting. I never really thought about that before. And I get quite interested in watching you calculate it and then downloading it to me. What do you think about it? I have this concept. Whenever we talk, we're having a conversation with ourselves. Whenever I talk, if I'm being interviewed, whenever you talk as a guest of my show, you're talking to yourself first. The guest is always talking to themselves first, so let them talk.
Mm.
Let them convince themselves of the thing that neurologically they think about themselves, and let them affirm in their own mind what they've always thought about themselves and drag bits and pieces out of information out of their life story to affirm who they are. What do you think about that? Have you noticed that in some of your guests?
Oh, I haven't noticed it in my guests, but I definitely noticed it in myself. Like,
wow.
That's like the place where 100%, like, I'll say things a lot of the time. I'm thinking, I'm saying this because this is something that I'm doing, but I want to continue to do. So you almost put the pressure on yourself to, you know, keep those, like, uphold those standards for yourself or what you're saying to make sure that you keep it relevant. But yeah, for sure. Like, I've always had this weird thing as a kid where I almost think of my life as like a documentary, and like almost before it plays out, like how things are going to happen, and then I actually go and do it. So it's a weird thing. I'm not sure. It's like something I've always sort of like, I wouldn't just call it visualization, but it's almost like just planning ahead, thinking about things, you know, showing where you want to be, and then trying and going and living and doing it.
So I mean, I will talk about your podcast a little bit later, but let's just go right back to early days. I mean, you're still pretty young, but let's go back to really early days.
Yep.
As a kid, growing up, what's it like growing up with a dad who's like really well known as an AFL footballer? I mean, what good and bad. I mean, I don't mean it's anything bad, but like where are the pressures that come from that? And then how did your family deal with that?
It was interesting, yeah, for sure. It was one of those things. Look, I've only had one dad, and you only know what you know, right? So I probably didn't know what it was like to have a completely normal upbringing, but
normal in the sense of what the population does.
Yeah,
the rest of the population.
Yeah,
as opposed to the word normal. I don't know what normal means, but the rest of the population,
for sure,
because you're an outlier.
Yeah,
your dad, as a well-known person, makes you an outlier as his son.
Yeah,
yeah,
correct. So, growing up through football was always something I wanted to do. Knowing Dad had played and been really successful throughout his career was obviously, really relevant in my head, and I always wanted to follow in his footsteps.
What's the positives of that though? Growing up, what were the added values to you? What did that add to your life?
So many doors opened, and I think for me, like, there's this idea of a self-made man. Like, no one's self-made. Like, good and bad, you learn from things as an upbringing, and different things have effect on you. Like, so many doors were open for me as a young kid, and opportunities that not many people would get. And I think it's a beautiful thing, but also it was nearly a negative if I look back now, of being able to experience all those things. Like being a part of a Carlton Footy Club and walking through those doors and being blessed with these opportunities that I hadn't necessarily worked extremely hard for, but I was just getting because of, my old man's opportunities. He opened the door for me. So, ultimately I ended up getting picked up to that footy club, and, I knew at a young age that I was going to go there. But the weight of having my dad there at the club, it was never relevant for me at all. Like, I never felt that pressure whatsoever, because my family were just worried if I was happy or not. Like, and I know that's a cliche thing to say, but my mum and dad have never put any pressure on me whatsoever. I actually wish they put more pressure on me, because I had to probably learn
in
later
terms of footy
in life,
or other things.
Just everything. Like, I'm a young father now, and it's really interesting. I think when you become a parent, you reflect on your own childhood a lot, and you think about all the things that you did. And I was such a shit kid, man. Like, I was just so spoiled. In the sense of not financially spoiled, but just like, if I didn't want to do something, I didn't have to do it. Or, I had extreme fears of like going on school camps, never went on school camps. And I sort of wish that, sometimes I wish now they forced me to do it, because those fears stayed with me for so much longer. Like, I didn't get to solve them when I was a kid. I had to solve them when I was like 26 years old. And those anxieties as a little kid that I maybe should have tried to work through at that stage, ended up sort of becoming bigger problems later in life that ultimately we're going to have to face eventually, but you're better off just going head first at the beginning. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
So, I've got 4 sons, and I've got 3 grandsons. I've got a lot of kids in my family, and I've often thought through this process myself. And each one of my kids is different. So I've had to put different pressures on different ones at different times. So did you have like a social anxiety? Because I just want to explore that.
No social anxiety. So like, I could talk to anyone and everything.
What was the camp
No
deal?
stress. So I've always had a level of, I just thought I was a nervous kid, to be honest. Like, growing up,
thought you were?
I thought I was nervous. I had no idea what anxiety was, and it's a word that obviously is very prevalent these days.
Yeah, it is these days.
I don't even like talking about it, because it's like, I don't want to give it the power that it is, but also it's something that I'm dealing with and living with and thriving with. I like to say I'm thriving with it, but I always had so many irrational fears as a kid. Like, I was really struggled staying away from home, hated, going to school, being away from my mum, going to, mates' houses for sleepovers, anything like that. Like, I couldn't do it.
Outside of your environment.
Outside of my environment, just couldn't do it.
And is it a control thing?
I don't know what it was. I'm not sure what it was, but it was just a fear that something bad was going to happen.
Is that why you like podcasts? So you're in control of the outcomes?
No, because it's funny, because there's so many things that I, with podcasting, I don't. Like, you don't know where something's going to go, and you got to put some
But you can always bring it back.
You can always bring it back.
You are sort of in control.
Yeah, somewhat in control. For me, it was more, I had just intrusive thoughts of things that were going to happen.
Well, right, you're going to get kidnapped or something?
Well, no, more so something like a very common one, like you call your mum, doesn't answer, fuck, she's dead. Okay? No. Something like
Serious?
that. Oh, terribly. Like if my wife doesn't answer the phone, I straight away stress. And I've gotten a lot better at this, like, having these conversations and being better at and learning to manage them and investing in my health. But, it's something that I've dealt with my whole life and through sport, through footy. It's been a part of me. I sort of wrote about it in my book, and I feel like I nailed it in that sense of it. It's my worst enemy, but my best friend, because it can make, it makes me who I am. It makes me considerate, makes me curious, makes me fun to hopefully be around. But also, it can be, you know, if I'm not managing it, it can be really challenging as well.
When you're a kid, you obviously don't recognise you have these sort of irrational worries. You don't realise the worries are irrational. They're not based on any logic. But they're also, because when you're a kid, though, everything's possible. That's the great thing about being a kid. Everything's possible. Nothing is impossible. As a kid, did you ever express those concerns to your parents?
Not once. I don't think I spoke to anyone until I was about 26 years old.
Do your parents notice it? Did they say, what's wrong with you, Dyl? Like, why are you feeling like that way?
I think they probably would. Like, there was just some weird things I was doing. Like, you know, obviously being, you know, in high school and not being able to sort of go on a school camp is, you know, and I was like to think of myself as having a lot of mates and things like that, and just had to make up that I had.
So you weren't a loner?
No, I wasn't a loner, and it was sort of hard to hide because, like, I was technically, like, you know, I had a lot of mates doing things, and I was like, no, I just don't want to do it. But I suppose later in life, you know, that sort of even manifested into some performance anxiety when I was playing sport, and I really struggled to get up for game day. So even when I was playing AFL,
you mean get your mind ready?
Yeah, mind ready for game day. Like, I'd love playing sport and love doing the week was fantastic leading up.
As in training?
Yeah, loved everything about it. But as soon as game day came, I was just like, fucking hell, like, I don't want to do this. Like, how can I get out of it? This is like, you know, driving to the MCG when you're like, should be absolutely wrapped that you've got a game and you're playing. And I'm like thinking, fuck, you know, maybe if I break my leg in the first quarter, then I'll be done. So just go out there and go as hard as you can.
Go and break my leg.
And just see what happens.
Is it a fear of failure? I mean, what?
Probably.
Yeah.
There's a lot there. And I think it sounds so stupid me saying that now, like to someone who doesn't, like maybe people listening can relate to that. But when you don't speak about it out to people, you just believe the things you're thinking. So until I got my opportunity actually up here in at the Giants, I had 6 years at Carlton and then 2 years up here in Sydney. I ended up sitting down with the guy.
The psychologist.
And I was like, look, I've never told anyone this because I thought they'd go tell the coaches. Then like, why would we play a bloke that doesn't even want to get out there and play? And he was like, mate, this is normal. Like, it's okay to feel like this. Like, you can. And I was like, fuck.
Thank God.
Like, I thought I was going crazy, you know. And I think that's the isolating part of when you live in your own head and you don't speak to people about certain things. It does get very lonely. You think that there is something wrong with you and you can't, you can't sort of get it together. But it was, super challenging times. I look back now and how open I am with it now and talking about certain things. I was like, fuck, like I would never have told anyone that because I was just so embarrassed.
Well, particularly go back a generation, like it's nearly like there's something wrong with, like you're weak or you're inadequate. I remember it's funny, you know, you used to say that about that. I used to have dreams, and I didn't play at your level, but I'm just talking as a young guy, like a teenager playing footy, rugby league. I used to have dreams about on game day, I would dream that I either forgot my mouth guard or I only had one boot.
Yeah, right.
And I used to, later on in life, I thought maybe I felt as though I wasn't properly prepared. I hadn't trained properly or wasn't prepared. And I played at rep level, but I was only a teenager, 15, 16, 17. And I used to think there was something wrong with me. And it was like a repeating dream. And until I found that one of my best mates, who was like the gun guy, playing NRL, he used to have the same dreams. And I thought, oh shit! Like I felt much better because it was more normalized.
Yeah.
It became normalized, but because I just happened to mention to him, "Oh, I'm mad. This is a mad dream. I left my mouth. I turned over without my mouth guard, or I had one boot." And he said, "I have the same dreams." And isn't it funny? Like once you talk to someone,
well, that's the power of conversation. Even podcasting, you know, like someone.
Well, this conversation now,
someone might learn from something today, like about that, and they don't feel as alone. Like I think the only time something that gives me. It's a harsh reality, but it's like such good perspective. And you can't take offense to it. It's like no one actually sort of gives a fuck about you.
Yeah.
Like you're so
100%
irrelevant, like of anything. And as soon as you somewhat can like come to terms with that and actually learn to love it, it does make your life a lot easier. And I think that, in saying that and bringing it back to that point, it's like no one gives a damn, and you're not the first person or the last person to go through that situation. So like anything that's happened has probably happened to someone else, and it's probably happening to a lot of other people. And for me, who's someone who's experienced times like that when you do feel so alone, you think you're the only person that's ever had a certain thought or you've done a certain thing and then you reacted a certain way. It's super comforting to learn that this is something that a lot of people go through, and you don't feel alone at all.
It's a good point you make, because often we think, nothing will ever happen to him. Look at him; he's got his dad, and he's talented, naturally talented, genetically talented. He's playing for Carlton, he's playing for the Giants. Look how good is it? And then you say that, and someone goes, "Oh shit!" Like people look at me, they think, "Oh wow, he's done all this." Like as soon as I don't want to go throw out their own vulnerabilities and all that shit, but every one of us,
mate, everyone, you could do straight talk with 10 people out in the street and they'd have a better story than me.
Yeah. They've all got vulnerabilities.
Everyone's got a great story.
Yeah. The point becoming, though, it's important to talk about it for your own sake.
For sure.
Helps
like you said before, that part about like me telling this today actually helps me continue to train it and keep going about it. So that's why there's a selfishness to being vulnerable. And I think people talk about this there's a selfishness to telling your story, because it actually continues to reinforce the same things that you want to continue 100%.
To do. 100%. That was sort of my point.
Yeah.
There is a selfishness.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a guy sitting here, one of my podcast, a guy called Danny Abdullah. And Danny, you probably don't know the story, but because you're from Victoria, but it's a lot of people sitting about him and his wife, and a lot of his kids, 3 of his kids died. Well, 2 of his kids died, and his one of his nephews or nieces died, where they were just walking up the road with their cousins, etc., to get an ice cream, and unfortunately, a guy was drunk and hit him with a car, and he saw his kids die, and Danny is a master of forgiveness now. He never used to be, but he's become a master of forgiveness. You know what he said to me? He said, "I do it for selfish reasons." He said, "Unless I can forgive that person," he said, "I'm going to will be tormented for the rest of my life, and it'll be no good to the rest of my family." And he's since had more children, but. And you're right. I mean, one of the things I've learned from being a podcast host is that people want to talk about themselves because there is a self-interest in that. It is actually therapeutic, and is actually also belief building. Mm-hmm. Helps you build the things you believe about yourself. Because we all have a story about ourselves. I don't give a shit who you are. You might have a story about yourself that you're a failure. That's because you keep building on that story that you fail, and you keep actually presenting yourself as a failure, and you keep reaffirming yourself you're a failure, and you become a failure.
Yeah,
you become the thing you believe about yourself, and that's what neuroplasticity is all about. You can actually change that, and plasticity meaning you can change the story about yourself. And
I think that's probably one of the biggest things that has helped me a lot. Like there was literally a conversation I remember I had with the same conversation with that psychologist I was chatting about. Would have been the same meeting, right? Like I got my money's worth in this chat, or maybe it was just a time in my life where I was like listening to things and actually taking them on board. But exactly what you're talking about in the sense of one of my biggest key indicators is language and how I speak to myself and what I say, because ultimately what I say is what I'll do and what I'll become. And I remember one day I was talking about this old like fable, and it was about these 2 wolves, and this like grandpa was talking to a grandson, and he was telling this story about the 2 wolves. One's positivity and one's negativity, or one's like winning and one's failing, and they've got to eat, right? And there's a battle, and they're always trying to get stronger, and you got to feed them, right? So positivity is like winning, gratitude, loved ones, going out for dinners, all those sort of things. Negativity is drinking too much, hanging out with the wrong crowd. Doing things that don't align with your values. And anyway, they come and they fight, and the grandson speaks to the grandpa and he goes, "Oh, well, like which one wins?" He said, "Like whatever one you feed," meaning they're not going to, none of them are ever going to die. Negativity is always going to be there, but the less you feed it, the weaker it's going to be. Like if you continually feed that positive wolf and you're doing all those things that equate to that wolf being so strong, you build that wolf up to becoming something that is just a fierce, like something that just cannot be reckoned with. That negativeness is going to be so weak, it just can't battle the other one. So for me, that came to language. It came to the way I speak about things. Like instead of, You know, I always listen to people, especially young people, when they talk and they go, fuck this, I'll never do that. And I say, well, yeah, well, not with that attitude, like as a joke, like not with that attitude. But if you say, I haven't done this yet, you see like the change just in that language, like I haven't done it yet. Like there's still a possibility you're going to. But if you write yourself off straight away, and again, this is just affirming it to myself, unless there's an example, you'll never hear me say, fuck this, I've never done that. Oh, fuck it, I'm not going to do that. Like you straight away, you're telling yourself you can't do it.
So how did you get from being the kid who didn't, or the younger man who didn't want to go play the game after prepared really well, also the kid who didn't want to go on a camp because of I didn't want to leave home.
Those reasons.
But how did you become? Was there a moment in your life where you go, that's it, and I got to change the narrative in my own mind to myself, and because I wouldn't mind knowing what your technique was, but how did that happen? When did it happen? Do you remember it being that crossover period?
Look, there's no one day you wake up and you've just got it. It's a skill. I've learned it as a skill. You've got to continue. It's a technique. Like you might say 10 things in a day and only catch one of them. And then the next day you're actually picking up on 3 of them.
But you've got to be conscious of it.
You've got to be conscious and you've got to listen to it and be conscious of what you're saying. And I almost got so addicted to this. I was listening to other people and going, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say it like that. Because it became so addictive for my to be this person. Then you start those little wins. You start saying like, oh, okay, I feel a bit better. I feel a bit more positive. Things are going my way and things are happening at a better rate. So for me, that was a massive win in that sense of being able to one, just change the language, which then changed how I felt about myself, my relationship with myself, and then how I ended up feeling about myself as well.
It's you being a sports person, you know, and knowing how to train for argument's sake. And if I could just use the rower, you know, the rowing machine, which I hate.
I hate that.
But it's because it's tough, right?
It's so hard.
It is tough. And but one of the things I know, but like what you're saying is, if I keep saying that, I won't do it.
Exactly.
But I know it's really good for me because you know, it exercises just about every muscle in your body. It's great for everything, aerobic, everything. So what I find is okay, I'll do 1 minute. Then I'll do 2 minutes. The next week I'll do 2 sessions of 3 minutes. And I keep building and building and building. That's no different to what you're saying though. So in a physiological sense, I can overcome something and actually make it my go-to. Now rowing is my go-to. I'm going to row.
Yep.
With your brain, I think the same, and your emotions and your mentality, I think the same thing exists, like you just said.
It's consistency, repetition, all those things. And like in fairness, we were chatting before about this, our wristbands we've got on these whoops. And for me, the first thing to go when I'm feeling myself is
sponsor.
The first thing that goes when I'm feeling myself in being busy. And I'm actually very curious about you because you're in some very good condition.
For an old bloke.
Well, for anyone, you're in great nick. And I think for me, that's something that the correlation between how you feel about yourself, your mental health and your physical health, you know, there's an incredible correlation there that's, you know, undeniable of obviously scientifically as well, how you feel, what you eat, what you do, how you sleep, all those things are so important. And, you know, from what I've been taught with my psych that I go and see is just like almost thinking about things as a pyramid. And your strongest base is those 4 things, right? So it's like eat, sleep, your general fitness, and your general health. And those.
Can I add community to that? Having a community.
Well, yes, yeah, definitely, yeah. I think I'll go back to this point because I think it's a really good point and up for discussion, up for debate. But those 4 are the bottom, right? A pyramid that has to be super stable. If you're not getting those 4 things right, you're not going to be actively involved and at the best for your community. So it's been something really hard for me to actually get my head around because as a father and now the most important thing to me in my life is my son, and I've got another baby due in May.
Congratulations.
Yeah. So
awesome.
It's really exciting. But prior to this, like it brought up a lot of like things, you know, as I said before, you relive your own childhood. How the fuck am I going to do this? How am I going to be a dad? And I think like for me, I was prioritizing business and family. And then myself was third. And I was just breaking down all the time, like whether it be health, mentally, physically, just feeling like shit. And then I'd come back and I'd be a shit version of myself for them. So the biggest thing for me now is like, how can I get those 4 things right so that the second layer, being family, friends, community, is optimal. So I think for me, it's like being in a really good place in all those four. And even if I don't want to do it, like I don't necessarily love doing those four things, but the reward it gives me to get back in that system, that process, keeping myself as healthy as I can physically be. Like health is wealth. You know, like I've had health issues. I've had some mental health stuff that's been super frustrating at times. But as soon as you go to those points, all you want is your health. All you want to do is be focusing on what's important, because then you can be a better version of yourself for everyone else.
It's a bit like the thing when you get on the airplane and they say, look, if the oxygen mask drops down and one drops down to your kid as well, put your one on first, because if you're no good, you're no good to anyone else.
If you pass out, you can't put theirs on.
Correct.
So it's exactly that. And I think, like, how did you manage with that? Like, is that something that you faced in your life? Like, have you put business and family first before yourself, or have you always found it quite something that you've got to be on top of?
More recently, I've realised I've got to prioritise myself. Actually prioritise myself. I think I did it sort of instinctively, just out of habit. So I'm a routine person, and I know the shit routines where I have a shit time, and I know the good routines. So it took me a while to work out, or to actually think about that, because often I'd have a really good routine and then I'd drop off the edge and I'd go through a shit routine, and that means drinking and all the other stuff, and then I'd pay the price, and I'd get back up on the horse and I'd go back through the good routine. But it was like I was trying to test myself or punish myself for being healthy. But these days I'm much more these days I've actually prioritized my health, all the things you talked about, sleep, nutrition, exercise. I prioritize those ahead of everything, not because I don't want to be unhealthy, but because in order to be a good father and a good grandfather and good at this and be able to meet my obligations, perform. I have to be that. I can't afford to have those dips. I mean, I still will have a dip every now and then, but it's not.
That's life, you know. You got to,
but not self-imposed.
Yeah,
you just get dips because.
And it's not to say either.
Get exhausted.
It's not to say that if you have a good routine, you're never going to face anything in your life. Like you're still going to, but you'll probably be able to manage it a lot better.
You're giving yourself your best chance. You're giving yourself
the absolute best chance, and I wasn't giving myself the best chance at all.
Well, does that come from? What did you? If you look back at your parents, did you learn any stuff from your parents? I definitely didn't, but
no.
Because it's not a thing that they're aware of, I don't think. But would you teach your kids this?
Oh, definitely. It's something that's huge for me. Like I take my son out, and my old man had played a lot of footy, obviously, and I knew how good he was. But
there's a footy world.
Yeah, exactly. But by the time he'd finished, he was retired and put on a lot of weight, doing a lot of drinking and
injuries.
So he was never he was never running or active. And I was actually chatting about a mate with this morning. Like the coolest thing I did recently, I was up in holidaying with the family and my brother-in-law. We went for a run, and he's got 3 boys. I've got 1 boy, and they walk out. They're like, "Dad, where are you guys going?" And I'm like, "Oh, we're just going for a run, mate. We'll be back." And I ran off going, "That's fucking cool." Like these 4 boys, like cousins, are just seeing their dad and uncle go for a run for fitness.
Yeah,
and then they're going to come back and do a bit of a workout. I was like, I never saw that. And imagine then, like the impression that's going to have on them. To then they grow up, they want to train, they want to be fit, they want to be a part of it. And I'm not saying that didn't happen for me, but it was a different. My dad had me a little bit later in life when that wasn't. He wasn't in that aspect of his life, and the routine of those things weren't there. So again, I had to probably learn that from other people later on in life. But it's something for me that's super important to be that not such a role model, obviously, to be doing those things and having good habits, but to be showing that you have to take care of yourself. And I think that, there could be people listening going, nah, fuck that. I have to look after my family first. And I totally get that. Like that's very admirable, but you have to look after yourself first. I believe now, like I've tried that, but if you want to be at 100%, I'm so much better at being a dad when I'm healthy. Like if I'm absolutely rat shit, working myself to the bone, not physically eating shit, anxious, annoyed, pissed off, like you go home and you bring that energy home with you. So it's been a big learning for me this year. It's been a really big learning for me.
Are you into the whole energy concept? Bad energy, good energy?
Oh yeah. I'm a freak. I'm a real weirdo.
Yeah, like give me a bit of that. I'm
into it too. Where are you going with it first, just so I don't go super weird? But
no, go weird.
Yeah,
because I'm weird, so It's okay.
Yeah, well, Oh, it depends how weird you want to go, but I'm definitely into like the universe, like, you know, manifestation, all those things. Like I believe, you know, to go really weird on you, like I don't believe in I'm not a religious person. Like I don't believe that there's like a person that's sitting in the sky and makes decisions. But what I do really like about religion in the sense of a higher power is the fact that, you know, like if you're a good person, you do good things, you work hard, you feel good about yourself. You do feel like that. If you put that into the world, good energy is going to come back to you.
Yeah, that's a bit like Buddhist.
Yeah, and I don't know a lot about Buddhism, but for me, you know, the way that I view things is I just believe in the universe. Like I believe that if I put good energy out there, I work hard to do the things I'm going to do, good energy comes back to me. And you can feel it, you know, when you're doing something that's not aligned with you, that disassociation piece, you can feel that energy that doesn't come back the way you want. So for me, it's almost a sense of religion, but I'd almost just believing in the energy of the universe that what I put out there is going to come back to me.
Well, if I could just...
Did I just invent Buddhism?
No, but you just threw yourself straight into it. But if I could just put a slight gloss on that.
Yeah.
There is one of the most famous physics exponents in the 20th century, last century, which is not that long ago, was a guy called Schrödinger. And Schrödinger, whilst like a super physics genius, okay, like he succeeded Einstein, so he was the next guy after Einstein, who was one of the best known physicists in the world. And he has this concept around religion, but not around religion, but about let's call it higher power. Let's call religion the system, the administration of the higher power, spirituality. But he has this concept called, you mentioned universe, but he has this concept of what he called universal consciousness. Mm-hmm. And it's about, he says that one of the fundamental laws of physics is that energy that exists in everything, never, the fundamental concept is that energy never disappears, it just changes form. So, you know, you can't say heat energy disappears, it just changes form into some other form of energy. And he took the view that when we die, our consciousness still exists, but it forms part of the universal consciousness. Mm. And that all of our energies go into one place, and that one universal consciousness is there to assist us or actually impede us. It exists out there right now. So when, you know, like if someone dies, you think, oh, they're dead. You can't, it doesn't make sense to say they're dead, because a moment ago when they're alive, they had a certain energy about them. They had a spirit or a soul or whatever the word is you want to use associated with it. And he tried to explain this away in his work by building this concept of the universe and the universal consciousness. And not just us, it's animals, it's plants, it's every other planet in the solar system that might have something similar to us. It exists in the whole of the universe, and it is around us all the time.
That's cool.
And so his book of universal consciousness, I think it's called Universal Consciousness. The book, I've read the book, I can't remember the name of it, but it's along the lines that you're talking about. And I think this stuff is for real. And it's not God. We choose, you know, going back ancient times, we choose to put labels on everything. You know, that's our human nature. Everything's got a name. It was Zeus, and it became God, and it became Jesus, and it became Muhammad, and Allah, and like we all given names. And Buddha would be called. There's Buddha, and there's, you know, like all of these different people. Hindus have all their people, but that's just human nature. We need to put a label on everything. But he gave it a phrase, and he gave it more of a description. I think that's pretty cool, because this is like what you're talking about, universal energy.
Yeah, I'd never heard of that. That anecdote, but I'll definitely look into it. Like I feel, you know, just thinking about it now, you feel like, you know, when you're like almost searching for an answer, and you sit in that uncomfortable periods where you're looking for certain things to do, and you'll have those feelings. It's like, imagine if like that was literally an encyclopedia of everyone that's past knowledge of certain situations that can then push you into certain things that are going. Like, who knows? Is it a thing, mate? Like, probably. I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, Schrödinger being a scientist, because, you know, like what's always intrigued me is, well, Albert Einstein was a Jewish guy, and Jewish in a religious sense, so he believed in God and all those things. But at the same time, he's a scientist, a physicist, a famous one. like one of the great thinkers of of all time, modern times at least. And I often used to think to myself, how do you reconcile being that scientist where, the concept of God is about a belief as opposed to knowledge, real knowledge. No one really knows God. No one's ever seen him that lives on this planet. People might see him when they leave this planet, but I don't know. But so God is a belief system, whereas scientists are into knowledge, what exists, like what they can see and prove mathematically. So I used to think to myself, how does Einstein reconcile that sort of stuff? Like being the physicist who he was, general theory of relativity and all the other stuff that he came up with. How does he reconcile the concept of God being a Jewish guy and at the same time being this great scientist? And then, of course, he never really wrote about it. But then the next person, because I love this stuff, because I'm always trying to reconcile the two. Because, I grew up my mother's Irish Catholic. I grew up in a Catholic family. My dad's Greek Orthodox Christian. So, it was a thing. And I've always tried to reconcile this whole process in my mind. And so I've did a lot of research. So Schrodinger's the one that came out. Like Schrodinger's got the famous story. Like it's a thought experiment about it's called Schrodinger's cat, and that's his very famous physics thought experiment. But he also wrote about this concept of how did he reconcile, and I don't know, he might have been Jewish too, but how did he reconcile faith, belief with actuality? And he came up with this physics theory that energy, which is our soul, never disappears. But therefore, where does it go? And therefore, what you're saying right at the very beginning of this conversation is going way out there, but it's good. Therefore, we can fall back and rely on the universe to help us out if we're doing all the right things, good things, like in a karma sense, like a Buddhist sense, like consciousness, look after our family, look after ourselves, not be an asshole. Don't be a bigot, don't be whatever, all the negative stuff. Try to be as positive as possible. I think the universal consciousness, the universe, will actually sort of give us a bit of guidance. That's what I think. That's sort of worked for me. Whenever I've been a dick, something shit has always happened to me. I once had this is getting right, but I once had an audience. I was given an audience, a private audience with the Dalai Lama. And I was allowed to ask 3 questions because I did someone who was very close to him a favor. And she organized this for me. She was one of his nuns. He has nuns who work for him. And he said, got 3 questions. I literally had 15 minutes with him. And the third question I asked him was, can you explain to me how you get rid of bad karma? And he said to me, there's only one way. If you've got 1 pound of bad karma, to get rid of that, you can't eliminate it. It never goes. Like you were saying before about negative, it never goes. He said, but you've got to outweigh it with not 1 pound of good karma. You've got to outweigh it with many pounds of good karma and just basically dilute it so that it goes here and good goes up there. I've never forgotten that. It's quite a very good practical technique, how you live your life. If you've got negative shit going on in your life, flood it with positive stuff. Yep. Just walking in the street, hello, how you going, Dyl? How's your family, mate? Or, it's Dyl's birthday. Mate, I just want to wish you a happy birthday and the best to your family. Or these little simple things. As someone's walking along the street doing a tough, hey, you go, mate. Don't know him. He might look filthy, dirty. Shake his hand. Make someone's day yourself. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I love that. I love the quote around moving, outweighing it with something else. 'Cause I feel like that's exactly what needs to be done, even from any circumstance whatsoever. It's funny though, like how things can work. Like realistically, the only thing you need is time a lot of the time as well, just to see things through, like those shit periods or karma, whatever it is. Like time eventually, by the end of it, if you do enough good things will come back.
So it's important to be patient.
It is.
And not be too tough on yourself.
Yeah.
Do you ever suffer from not being patient or too tough on yourself?
I'm probably the least patient person in the world, but I think one thing I like to say is like be patiently impatient. So I don't like people that are too patient because if you're not trying to get somewhere, you're never going to get it. So you just got to know that be impatient, but be patient.
Okay, we've rapped, as in not WRAP, but we've been rapping about a lot of stuff out there.
Yeah, we are.
Just tell me, I want to get back to your podcast.
Yep.
let's talk about it. It's Dyl Friends.
Dyl Friends.
Dyl, DYL, and
Friends.
not Dylan.
So I'm the first one, and then
Friends.
Yeah.
Where do I find it? Spotify,
iTunes? Apple, YouTube. Yeah, it's all there.
Yeah. Okay. So how's it going?
Yeah, really good. It's funny. I was telling the boys before I actually started the show when I was up here in Sydney. So I remember I'd been delisted from Carlton, and I was doing a show there, and I couldn't take it with me because it was owned by the club. And I remember going, "Fuck, I don't want this to happen again. I need to start my own thing." So I was doing some radio work. I used to like go and do Triple M after footy training when I was playing at the Giants.
That was the afternoon show.
Yeah, it was with Liam Flanagan and Mark Geyer up here at Triple M. So I used to scoot in with Liam and MG. And it's funny, actually, you've had the Hello Sport boys in. So Tom Birmingham was actually working as a producer of that show. So I'd come in, we'll just sort of get chalking, and he's like, "What do you want to do?" I was like, "Oh, look, mate, like I want to start a podcast." And he's like, "Fuck, like I do a podcast called Hello Sport." He goes like, "All you need to do is buy this like equipment, Anyway, so I went the next day, bought the thing and just started just interviewing teammates. It was just for fun and to get more experience, because when I got delisted from Carlton, I was like, how am I going to get into the industry? I don't have any skills, haven't played 300 games, haven't won premierships, haven't done all these things. So there wasn't really a spot for me to be like expert comments, because I wasn't really an expert in the field. So I was like, fuck, I got to find the back door here. Like, how can I show them that I'm actively trying to get more confidence in the media sense, interviewing people, doing skits. Anyway, so I started interviewing them. I ended up getting another year on my contract and stayed another season. And then for me, it was just about, getting as many runs on the board as I could with the show, getting more episodes, so that then ultimately, again, I'd take that to a radio station and be like, look, I've done the work. Can I have a job?
Yeah, here's a little pack.
Yeah, it was like, instead of just sitting on my ass, I was like, I want to show you I've done something, because I'd been there 2 years earlier with nothing and I didn't get any opportunities. And I remember I went back to Melbourne and I was working at a 3AW, which is the equivalent of like 2GB here. So it's sort of like an old school sort of AM radio, and was working on the phones, answering the all the calls, and putting together the run sheets, learning how to become a producer on that. And I didn't love it, but I learned a lot from it. And I think even from a business term, I learned that it wasn't what I wanted to do, and I wanted to work for myself. And ultimately, I got let go of that job. I didn't really get let go, actually. I just didn't get shifted on anymore. So I don't know if it's a sacking or I'm still on the books, but just didn't get any more shifts. And then from that period, I had to go like, all right, I'm all in on the podcast, because I was doing that at the same time the whole way through. And it's just crazy how, things work. And as you said, the universe, when you make a leap of faith, things, automatically sort of open up. And I remember at that period had no sponsorships, but I was actually selling merchandise. And the community that I had built was so amazing and incredible, and just wanted to support.
What sort of merch? What are we talking about?
Just like jumpers, t-shirts, hoodies, like just all those sort of things was just selling.
But you made the merch, or
I'd order it from like a Gildan or an AS Colour. Yeah. I met a screen printer in Melbourne. I'd go get it screen printed.
Was it Dylan?
Yeah, it said like Dyl Friends on the hoodies.
That's cool.
And that funded then my eventual business, which has now become Producy. Like, that was the thing. Like, I earned more money in my first year out of footy than I made in football.
Wow.
From selling merchandise.
Wow. Serious?
Yeah.
Shit. You must be good at the merch then. The merch must be pretty good.
It wasn't that great, but it was just the fact that like it was the show and the people that wanted to wear it and be a part of a community was so amazing, and so enthralled in what we were doing, and they loved the independence of it. They loved hadn't been really done before in AFL.
You weren't part of someone else's network?
No, I was just independent. It was just my own thing. And I'd learn a lot. Like, I'd actually had Andy Lee, who was a big Carlton supporter. He spoke at an event one time, and he's an incredible business mind. And I remember him saying about how Hamish and Andy always owned their products. They never wanted to sell. And it was something where I was like, oh, fuck, I'm going to do that. Because when I left Carlton, I couldn't take the stuff that I'd done with them. So it sort of had that always ticking in the back of my mind, like, own everything you do, like bootstrap it, be the owner. It might take a bit longer, but you're going to own everything you do.
So just talking about footy, and I'm, as you know, I'm an NRL guy, but I have to confess, I have been a Collingwood supporter for many years, only because Eddie's my mate, and I sponsored them.
You're a pies man.
And usually that alienates me immediately against everyone who is not a Collingwood supporter. But let's just talk about the season for 2025.
Mm-hmm.
The Swans got the new coach. What do you think? What do you think Swans? What do you think is going to happen?
I like the Swans. Like, obviously, I was
still like them. Like in terms of capability for 2025.
I think it's really interesting. I'm actually halfway through a documentary at the moment on Netflix. I'm watching the Boston Red Sox doco. Have you heard of?
Yep.
Do you follow the baseball? Or you know
I
their story?
do. But I know the story, but I haven't read.
So I actually don't know the story, but I'm watching it because I don't want to spoil it. It's sort of inevitable what's going to happen, I feel. But for those who haven't heard of it, it's the New York Yankees are a powerhouse. Boston Red Sox had Babe Ruth, the curse of the Bambino. Like they traded him to New York, and then they just couldn't beat New York at all. And, I'm at the stage now where it's sort of come into like Moneyball and they're sort of building their team and things are happening. But a similar thing sort of happening with the Swans. Like, the last couple grand finals have been pantsed on the big stage. They're a great team. Like their talent is unbelievable. Like players like Errol Goulden and, Papley, Heaney, these guys are unbelievable players. But unfortunately, just when it's got to that last day, they haven't been able to nail it. And I think with John Longmire leaving recently has been really interesting because he's probably like one of the best coaches that has ever been, around. It'd be interesting to see what happens if he goes to Tasmania or whatever happens there. But Dean Cox, from all reports, is absolutely incredible, and it's probably the decision that needed to be made. Like, you know what it's like in the business world. Like, if you don't deliver, no matter how good you are, you've almost just got to pass the baton on to the next person. And to put those two together, to come around in a long-winded statement, I'm assuming the Red Sox go on to win a World Series. And it's like, if that team can do it, the Swans should seriously watch that documentary because it'll give them a lot of confidence.
You reckon they got the talent?
They got the talent. They got everything. Even their game plan.
But why do you think they fold?
Realistically, you can't. It's hard to say. They've folded twice, and unfortunately, it's just been on the last day in September, which has been really disappointing for them and their fan base.
So is that a matter of how they've been prepared as a team? In other words, they haven't been prepared to be at the top of the game on the last game. And in other words, they might have been peaking too early.
It's a good question. Like if I knew the answer to that, I might be coaching him this year. But I'm sure Dean Cox knows what he's doing. The first time they lost against Geelong, they just got jumped by a better team. But this time, they had a great season. Brisbane just came. They were more hardened and the Swans just couldn't bounce on it. Like it was a really, really disappointing game. But I do feel like they'll bounce back.
And on your show,
it'll be hard though the next time that they're in a grand final. Like, can you imagine that?
Oh my God!
Two getting like the mental. You talk about language and what you believe about yourself. Like all the language in the world you can train, but there is a belief there. Or there are actually examples that it hasn't happened. Like it's going to be hard to turn, but I do think they will be able to.
So, would what be going through the mind is that we believe that we on the big at the big dance we can't make it? Do you think that's going to be an issue?
Well, it depends what their language is like, I suppose. And I think
what would you say to them?
Well, I don't think they'd be taking advice from me.
You never know.
But I think
they all listen to this show.
Okay, good. Well, I'd say to them, they're an incredibly talented team. I think that they can do whatever they want. And Dean Cox as well, like at the helm now, fresh start, new team. They'd be just sort of licking their wounds and getting on with it. I think you've got to move on. You've just got to move on and not sort of go back to that time. But Dean Cox is a premiership player. He's played with West Coast Eagles and played in one of the best eras of footy with Jard and Cousins and Daniel Kerr, and he knows what to do. So I think it's going to be a really interesting time. And footy clubs, I think, are really interesting places. And I actually had Tom Harley on the podcast this year, who's the CEO of the Swans. And a footy club, as much as it's about performance on field, it's just as good as it's only going as well as the business is going for sustained success. So if you've got good people at the football club, on the board.
At every level,
that's how you become consistent and you give yourself the best shot for a long time. Because you look at other clubs that might fly up the ladder for 1 year, win a couple flags. You look at Penrith and what they've been able to do over the last few years. Like, yes, they're a good football team or a rugby team, but I'm sure they've got some incredible administration as well. Like that's probably that gets overlooked.
Well, is it in the Netflix series, is Boston building it from the top down?
They are, yeah. So they get in a guy that was from the Oakland A's. They get in this other guy. Yeah, they had to, get the administration right. Exactly.
Re-engineer the job.
Yeah.
And will you be interviewing Dean?
I'd love to interview Dean. Yeah, he's a star. I'll definitely get him on the pod.
Yeah.
He's a ripper.
And for 2025, what's ahead of you?
Big stuff, I suppose. Like the business has been, rapidly growing. We're sort of doubled each year, which has been cool. So
double in terms of audience, downloads,
but also just our revenue and everything's been really cool and cool to grow. Like we're business is called Producy, so we're split into two sort of fractions. Like one is our sports network, Clubby Sports, which we have 8 podcasts that target 18 to 35-year-old men. And we do all of our sales independently, all of our production independently, and we have that side of our business. And then the other side is our production agency, which we work with brands to create video content as well for their brand. So they sort of work entwined. Like if we work with a brand like Cobram Estate, which is one of our biggest brands,
the olive oil mob,
extra virgin olive oil mob.
Yep.
They work with us on our shows, but then we go and shoot all their content in Sacramento and shoot all their harvest, their fields as well, which has been really cool. So as much as I'm loving the podcasting stuff and the interviews, I've found a real love for business, and our team's grown to 16 now. We're an independent business. We do everything ourselves. We want to, it's taken us a lot longer to build that, but I'm really grateful and I suppose happy we've taken that longer route to build it, but own everything we do.
Is your final question though? Is your business model advertising or subscriptions? What is it?
Advertising. Yeah.
So therefore, the elements are you got to build your audience, you got to build your engagement, you got to know your audience, so you can sell the audience demographics into the advertising agency, and then you get the advertising dollars.
Exactly.
That's your model.
Basically, yeah. Events and merchandise as well. So we have those arms too. So. Yeah. The four main, if you talk about the pillars of health, in a business sense, it's podcasting, events, apparel, and then also our production.
And you produce for others.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got a production team.
Yep.
So if there's any spare time, you say, well, so that they're full capacity, I'll charge somebody else to come and do a podcast, for example, or something like that.
Podcast, mainly, like we can definitely help people with podcasts, but more content for their business and shooting long stuff. Because it was sort of funny, the guys that work with me on the shows, I realized we realized earlier we're using these incredible, almost cinematographers for 1% of the skill. Setting up a podcast is not that hard, but these guys are going off and doing like incredible shoots, and that's where we're working with the brands and the relationships and like, oh, can you guys do this? Bang. Now we're doing all their work for them as well, which has been really cool. So
that helps you get advertisers.
Yeah.
Because most advertisers don't have to say, oh, we've got to go and get an agency who then goes out and gets people to do the photographs and the photography and the filming and et cetera. Then you can help. You can even help write their scripts and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's a one-stop shop. It's been awesome. And just working really tight with cool people has been amazing.
They come back.
Yeah.
Those advertisers come back.
Yeah.
Well, Dyl Friends, I can now happily say I'm one of your friends, and I'll be listening. I'll be tuning in, especially in 2025, to see what you're up to. Thanks very much for coming to the show, mate.
Thanks, mate. We'll have to return. Yeah, so next time we're in Melbourne, we'll come on Dyl Friends.
So it's actually been really interesting for me. I've had a bit of a buzz talking about some of the stuff we talked about. For our audience, I apologise if we went a bit too far out there, but far out there is where we want to be. That's what this call Straight Talk for. Thanks very much.
Awesome. Thanks, mate.